Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're opening up a file that sounds deceptively simple on the surface.
But it's really not.
No, not at all. If you've ever, hesitated while writing an important email to a boss or stopped mid-sentence in a conversation because you suddenly felt awkward, you know it's anything but simple.
It's amazing how much stress a couple of tiny syllables can produce.
Right. We are tackling two very small English words that cause a disproportionate amount of confusion and anxiety. Shall and ought.
Tiny words. Massive baggage.
Because they both occupy this very crowded, murky space in our brains. They're both sort of about the future or giving advice or making suggestions. But you can't just swap them out randomly like you can with some synonyms. If you use the wrong one, you don't just make a grammar mistake.
You risk sounding like a time traveler from the 1800s.
Exactly. Or worse, like you're judging someone's soul when you just meant to give a friendly tip.
And that is really the mission for this deep dive. We have a great stack of notes, linguistic research, and usage guides here to help us disentangle these terms.
Which we desperately need.
We do, but we aren't just looking at textbook definitions. If we just read the dictionary, this would be a very short and, frankly, boring conversation.
Yeah, nobody wants that.
Right. We're looking at usage. We're going to look at grammar, sure, but also formality, regional preferences, specifically that fascinating British versus American divide, and really the social coding of these words.
I love that phrase, social coding.
Yeah.
Because that's what it feels like. It's not just about being correct. It's about how we position ourselves relative to the person we're talking to.
Exactly. It's about power dynamics.
So we've got these two heavyweights, shall and ought. Where do we even begin?
I think we have to start with shall. It's the one that trips people up the most because it feels familiar, yet totally elusive.
Yeah.
It's like a ghost word for a lot of people.
Okay, let's unpack shall. To me, shall feels like that fancy tuxedo or evening gown you keep in the back of your closet.
Oh, that's a great way to put it.
You know it's there. You paid for it. But you are never quite sure if the occasion is formal enough to actually wear it without looking ridiculous.
That is a perfect analogy. And looking at our source material, there's a very specific constraint, a rule, really, that dictates when you can take that tuxedo out of the closet.
Okay.
The source highlights what linguists call the rule of persons.
The rule of persons.
Yeah.
That sounds incredibly dramatic.
Right.
Like something out of a fantasy novel.
It does sound like that, but it's actually quite a practical guardrail. The source makes it clear that in modern English, shall has a very limited territory. It is mostly used with the first person. That means I and we.
Just I and we. That's the whole rule.
Predominantly, yes. You generally don't use it with you or they or he or she. If you step outside of I and we, the tone changes drastically.
So saying something like, shall you go to the store? Is that wrong?
It's not wrong in the strict sense that the sentence falls apart grammatically, but in modern usage, it sounds incredibly awkward. It sounds archaic.
Right.
But more importantly, if you use it as a statement like, you shall go to the store, it stops being a suggestion. It becomes a command.
Oh, right. Like, you shall go to the ball.
Exactly.
It's fairy godmother energy, or maybe legal energy. You shall pay this fine.
Precisely. When shall is combined with the second or third person, you or they, it creates an imperative. It sounds biblical almost. Thou shall not pass.
Yeah.
It implies you have total authority over the other person.
Yeah.
That's why we avoid it in casual conversation. We don't want to sound like we're issuing a decree.
That makes total sense. So the rule of persons is basically a safety mechanism to keep us from sounding like tyrants.
You could say that.
We just stick to I and we.
Exactly. The sweet spot for shall, the place where it naturally lives without making things weird, is first person singular and plural.
Okay, so if we're limited to I and we, what's the actual function? If I'm not commanding someone, what am I doing when I look at my friend and say, Shall we?
This is the beautiful part. We are usually making a suggestion or an offer. This is the primary function the source identifies.
An offer.
Yeah, it's not just about predicting the future. It's about opening a door. It's an invitation.
Let's look at the example from the source to make this concrete for you. The example is, shall we start the lesson?
Right. Shall we start the lesson? Now, I want you to really think about the alternatives here.
Right.
You could say, do you want to start the lesson? Or, are we starting the lesson? Or even, let's start the lesson.
Well, let's start is a bit pushy.
Mm-hmm.
Or we start and this sounds impatient. And do you want to start? Puts all the burden on the other person to vote to decision.
You hit the nail on the head. Do you want to ask for a preference? But shall we implies a shared action. It's a collaborative suggestion.
Collaborative. I like that.
It says, I am ready, and I think you are ready, so let's move forward together. It's softer than a command, but it pushes the action forward more than a simple question.
It's the let's dance of grammar.
It is. Shall we dance is iconic for a reason. Imagine just saying, do you want to dance?
It just doesn't have the same ring to it.
It's fine, but it's a yes or no data query. Shall we dance is a vibe. It's a gesture.
I love that distinction. It's about the vibe. But there's another layer here that the source points out, which I think is why Americans in particular, myself included, get nervous using it.
The British connection.
Exactly. The source explicitly notes that shall is much more common in British English and in formal situations.
Yes. If you're watching a British drama or listening to the BBC, you're going to hear shall all the time. It's standard.
Right.
But in American English, it has largely fallen out of daily conversation. It carries a specific flavor of formality or, frankly, pretentiousness if you use it wrong.
Yeah, if I walked into a sports bar in Chicago and said, shall we get some wings? My friends would look at me like I just fell out of a Jane Austen novel.
They might ask where your top hat is.
Exactly. But let's look at the second example from the text, because this highlights the nuance really well. The phrase is, I shall call you later.
I shall call you later.
See, if I said that to my friend, they'd probably ask me why I'm being so dramatic.
It does sound distinct, doesn't it? Compare it to the standard American version. I'm going to call you later. Or just, I'll call you later.
I'm going to call you is just a fact. It's a prediction of the future.
Right.
I'll call you is a promise. But I shall call you sounds like a proclamation.
It expresses determination. That's a key word the source uses here. Shall implies that the will of the speaker is involved.
The will.
Yes. It's not just that the call will happen. It's that I am determined to make it happen. Nothing will stop me.
It's fascinating that a word that sounds so fancy is actually stronger and more intense than the regular words.
That's the irony. It's polite, but it's forceful. However, that brings us to a really key reality check from the source.
Let's hear it.
While we are analyzing the nuance of shall, we have to acknowledge the modern shift.
Which is?
That shall is fading. In modern everyday English globally, but especially in North America, will is eating shall.
So I will call you later.
Yeah.
This is basically conquered. I shall call you later.
Precisely. Language evolves toward efficiency and simplicity. Will is the Swiss Army knife right now.
It does everything.
It does the heavy lifting for almost all future tense situations. Predictions, promises, snap decisions. Will covers it all.
So the takeaway here for you listening is, if you hear will, where you technically might expect shall based on old grammar books, that's normal. That is modern usage. You aren't hearing a mistake.
Correct. But, and this is why we do the deep dive, if you want to sound polite or make a gentle suggestion with we, shall is still your best friend. Shall we go is still very much alive, even on American English.
It's the one piece of the tuxedo we still wear. We might be wearing jeans, but we'll put on the tuxedo bow tie for shall we go.
I like that. It captures a specific social grace that do you want to just misses entirely.
Okay, so we got a solid handle on shall. It's for I and we, it's for suggestions, and it's a little British, a little formal. Now let's pivot to the other word in our dynamic duo, ought.
Ought. Now, this word feels heavier. If shall is a tuxedo, ought is a heavy wool coat. Or maybe a backpack full of books.
It definitely feels heavier. And the first thing I noticed in the source is that ought never travels alone. It has a constant companion.
The word to. You rarely see ought without wool to following it immediately. You can't just say, you ought go. It has to be, you ought to go.
Right, it's a package deal. So what makes ought to different from just giving advice? Why do we need this clunky two-word phrase?
The source outlines 3 pillars for ought to. First, giving advice. Second, expressing duty. And third, and this is the big one, saying what is the right thing to do.
The right thing to do. That sounds serious. That sounds like we're entering the realm of ethics.
We are. This is where we get into the moral dimension. Shall is about the future or offers. Ought is about obligation. It appeals to a standard outside of yourself.
Let's look at the example provided in the text. People ought to be kind to each other.
That is a perfect example to analyze. People ought to be kind to each other. Now, try swapping that with people could be kind to each other.
Could sounds like an option.
Yeah,
Like, hey, if you have some spare time, be kind, but no pressure.
exactly. Could is about ability, but people ought to be kind implies a moral standard. It suggests that if they aren't kind, they're failing a societal duty.
Wow.
It's not just a good idea, it's the correct way to behave.
I see. So ought carries a weight of judgment, or at least a weight of expectation that other words just don't.
Yes, it appeals to an external standard. It says, there's a rule here and we should follow it.
What about the other example, which feels a little more mundane? You ought to study English every day.
This is more on the advice side of the spectrum. But notice how it still feels like a duty. It's not just, it would be fun if you studied. It's, if you want to succeed, this is the necessary path. This is what is required of you.
It feels hierarchical, like a teacher talking to a student.
Or a parent. You ought to clean your room. It's not a suggestion.
You just used the word should a moment ago, and I think we need to talk about that.
Yeah.
Because to my ear, you should study, and you ought to study sound almost identical.
They are very close. In fact, functionally, they are often interchangeable. But the source notes that ought to is slightly more formal than should. And I would argue it's slightly more objective.
Objective how?
Well, think about should. Should can be very subjective. I might say, you should try that new pizza place. That's just my opinion. It's friendly. You ought to try that new pizza place. Sounds weird, doesn't it?
Yeah, it sounds like eating the pizza is a moral requirement. Like I'm a bad person if I don't eat the pizza.
Exactly. That's the nuance. Ought implies a structural requiring. You ought to renew your license. You ought to pay your taxes. It fits better there. Should is the casual, everyday version.
So should is the casual, friendly neighbor, and ought to is the slightly sterner, more formal older brother who really cares about the rules.
That's a great way to put it. And just like will is replacing shall, should is largely replacing ought.
That was my next question. Is ought fading too?
It is. We are becoming a more casual society. Ought feels stiff. It feels a little bit like finger wagging. You ought to know better. That stings more than you should know better.
Oof. Yeah. You ought to know better. Sounds like I'm in serious trouble. It hits different.
It twists the knife
Yeah.
because it implies you violated a known standard.
So if shall is fading because of will and ought is fading because of should, it feels like English is getting flatter. We're losing the sharp edges.
In a way, yes. We lose some nuance, but we gain simplicity. However, and this is what I love about language for you learning this, or for anyone who wants to be precise, knowing that nuance is a superpower. A superpower. Yes. Because when everyone else is speaking flat English, knowing when to drop an ought to into a conversation can make you sound very authoritative. It adds texture.
You ought to listen to this deep dive.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It implies it's your duty to be informed. It's not just a recommendation. It's a mandate for self-improvement.
I like that. It's about intentionality. Okay, let's bring this all together. We've covered a lot of ground today. Grammar rules, social vibes, British versus American usage, the moral weight of words.
It's a lot.
It is. So for you, the listener, who's maybe driving right now or doing the dishes and just wants the cheat sheet, let's synthesize this.
Sure. Let's boil it down to a strategy.
If I am unsure if I'm standing there freezing, not sure which word to pick, what is the safest strategy?
The safe mode strategy. If you are nervous, just use will and should. In modern English, you will basically never be wrong with those words. They're the universal adapters of the language.
So if you're nervous, stick to will and should. You will never be wrong. You won't sound archaic, and you won't sound bossy.
Exactly. You might miss a tiny bit of flavor, but you won't be incorrect. You will be understood perfectly.
But if we want to be power users, if we want that texture, let's recap the definitions one last time.
Okay. For the power user, shall. Use it primarily with I and we. Use it for suggestions and offers. Shall we is the golden phrase. And remember, it creates a polite, slightly formal, collaborative vibe.
And ought.
Ought to. Always use the to. Use it for advice, duty, or moral obligation. Use it when you want to say something's the right thing to do, not just a good idea. And remember, it's stiffer and more formal than should.
So shall is for offers and the future. Ought is for duty and advice.
That is the core distinction.
And I think it's interesting to note that while we say these words are fading, they haven't disappeared. They've just become specialized.
That's a crucial insight. They haven't vanished. They've retreated into specific territories. Shall has retreated into the territory of polite suggestions, shall we dance? And ought has retreated into the territory of specific moral weight.
Which means when you do use them, they pop. They stand out more now than they probably did 100 years ago.
Exactly. Using shall today is a choice. It signals something specific about your personality or the tone you want to set. It signals gentility. And using ought signals that you aren't just giving an opinion, you are appealing to a higher standard.
So what does this all mean for you listening? Why should you care about two fading words?
Because having a limited vocabulary limits your ability to express how you feel. It limits your social range. You can speak safe English with will and should, and that's totally fine.
Right.
But if you want to be that person who can politely command a room with a, shall we begin, or express a deep conviction with, we ought to do better, then these words are tools you need in your kit.
I love that. It's about having a full toolbox.
Yeah.
You don't always need the specialized screwdriver, but when you do, nothing else works quite as well.
Precisely. And don't be afraid to experiment. Try using shall for your next group suggestions. See how people react. It might change the energy of the room.
Shall we get lunch? Sounds a lot better than you guys want to eat.
It elevates the mundane. It makes lunch feel like an occasion.
It really does. But before we wrap up, this whole shift from shall and ought to will and should gives me a thought. Something for you to mull over after you finish listening.
Oh, what's that?
Well, language is always evolving, right? We're moving toward will and should because they're simpler, more casual.
Yes, the flattening effect we talked about.
Exactly. So imagine 50 or 100 years from now, as slang and even more casual shorthand take over our digital communication, will words like should and will eventually become the new formal words?
Oh, that's a fascinating thought.
Right. Well, future generations look at you, should go to the store and think, wow, that sounds so archaic and stuffy. What's the new word that's going to replace them?
Oh, that is entirely possible. The casual speech of today often becomes the rigid grammar of tomorrow as new casual forms emerge. It really makes you wonder what the next universal adapters will be.
Something to keep an ear out for. Well, on that note, we shall wrap up this deep dive.
And our listeners ought to feel much more confident now.
I see what you did there.
I couldn't resist. It was right there.
Thank you so much for walking us through this. It's fascinating how much history, psychology, and social signaling is packed into these tiny words.
It's always a pleasure. Language is the ultimate code, and it's fun to crack it.
A huge thank you to you, our listener, for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you walk away with a little more clarity and maybe a bit of that formal confidence the next time you make a suggestion.
Just remember, language is alive. It changes. But understanding where it came from helps you understand where it's going.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you on the next one.
Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and like the video. See you next time.